All right, enough philosophy.
To tell you their overall philosophy in life.
Four Noble Truths, even if you look at them a lot of different perspectives, the eight-spoked wheel, like you're like, oh, this is kind of like human scientific discovery as well as rich contemplative, historical, cultural stuff. So I could see, a scholar doing that.
Yeah, I think that you can go pretty far in terms of like insights and stuff like that by just doing the scholarship without actually practicing.
Yeah.
I think in the philosophy, it mostly says that you need to practice to get to the final, you know.
Science, philosophy, every idea.
But philosophy is...
My philosophy is enjoy.
It's like, there he is, and then he's gone. How are you?
Great. How are you?
Good. You seem less energetic than normal. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, no, just yesterday was a long and intensely busy juggling many things day. So,
Yeah, you're right in the heat of the semester. And this is your first semester back, is that right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we had relatives in from out of town, kind of last minute thing that threw me off, and so I had to jump into gear and become a host, chef, setter, and yeah,
Yeah, no, that's a lot. It's funny how like you're like, oh, it's exciting. There's family coming, and then you're like, wait, I have to be responsible for all this extra stuff.
yeah.
Well, is it still ongoing or is today a little
Oh,
slower?
no, they might come back today. They're in a hotel nearby.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, my mother-in-law turned 79 yesterday, and that was the occasion.
Oh, that's awesome.
And they're in from out of town, so I think they're going to stay here at least another day. It may be they'll take her out to lunch or something, and then I think they're off to visit other friends in Connecticut or something like that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, my mom had her 80th birthday this year, and so exciting. Like old birthdays are just kind of like simple and fun and
Yeah.
uh
Landmark number 80.
yeah, it's funny. If we had 12 fingers, it would not be as important, but because we have 10, it's like, oh, this is a big one.
Good point. Ever,
Uh-huh.
ever putting things in perspective, Robert.
Yeah, or taking them way out of perspective, one or the other. Yeah.
Well, both of those are very useful skills.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's
Reframe,
the kind of
reframing, yes.
yeah. Yeah,
How
it's good. Yeah, so I think I sent you some pictures from the conference I went to.
Yeah, that looked awesome.
Yeah, it was like I took 2 weeks off and I drove. And I love driving. That's why I chose to drive. And it also was logistically a mess to use Canadian airports right now and use like flying. So I got to drive from Florida through Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, up to Wisconsin. I stayed up there, like I kind of lingered on Wisconsin, the Great Lakes, and all that. Like time is so much slower in Wisconsin than it is in a city like Clearwater, and I'm sure New York is even more so. But yeah, so I just loved that. And then you get to Thunder Bay, also very slow moving time kind of place. And yeah, I got to hang out with just John. I think we hung out, we had breakfast together one day, and then I had lunch with like him and Christopher Master Piestro and Sevilla and my friend Lizelle. Do you know Lizelle at all?
I think I've seen Lizelle on a Zoom. I'm not sure. It sounds
Okay.
very familiar.
Yeah, she lives in the Netherlands, and I met her during one of the Dialogos weekends because she loves John's work. So I recognized her name from the comments that she'd leave comments sometimes. And then they shuffled us into a group and we had such a good time. I think I might have told you about this, like, but not about her. The group was like just I don't know, it's like a weepy guy, this guy that was really like indulgent in the fact that he could like let his emotions flow and and then there was a woman who was kind of nurturing towards him in an awkward, not very philosophical way. And then her and I were like doing pretty good salvaging like the sinking boat. And so I was like, oh, this is awesome. I really enjoyed practicing with you, and I have a little bit of an idea of you. And then we just started hanging out and became really good friends. And so I got to meet her. She lives in the Netherlands, and so it was really cool to see her. So yeah, so we went out to lunch. Layman, who I guess you know pretty well now. You're like always on stuff with him.
I 3 or 4 times, I forget.
Yeah, you two are like so well fit for each other, right? Like you just have such similar interests and backgrounds,
And
uh,
Bruce too.
and Bruce. Yeah, I don't know Bruce at all. I've only seen him ever in a few videos, and I think he might be on Greg Henriquez's listserv, but I've never really interacted. But yeah, he seems pretty cool, and yeah, also very similar to both of you. So yeah, I got to like Layman lives there in Thunder Bay, so
Right.
I like hung out with him for like 8 or 10 hours. He was super generous with his time. So anytime he was free, I would sneak over there and we'd talk about egregores and practice and stuff on a porch somewhere. Uh,
Very cool.
yeah. Have you watched any of the videos from that? Like they were actually really good talks too.
I've heard a few of them.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool. Which ones?
Um, oh goodness, I don't remember, but I know I've heard a few of the
Huh.
kind of post-mortem kind of things. I heard one or two with Layman, I think, and one or two with John. I forget who else was there.
Yeah, it
Uh,
was Jonathan Peugeot, and Paul
Jonathan
Vanderklay,
Bishop.
and then there's another
Yeah,
scientist
yeah, I
named
heard a couple of the ones with the three of them
mhm.
talking to each other or about each other or whatever.
Yeah. They're so meta. It was weird to be in the room, and in the first night, John gave like the intro kind of keynote about consciousness,
Yeah, that
and Jonathan Peugeot was like a row up and to my left, and you could see him like emoting, like, "Oh, I just want to talk about this with him right now," and like viscerally reacting to all of the good comments and things.
I've seen so many of these talks like every day when I go running.
Yeah.
One of these, anything with John or one of his friends. That's what I usually listen to. I'm in this,
Uh-huh.
so I forget who said what where. It gets to be big blur. But was one of the ones from Thunder Bay where John starts speaking. He mentions the Holy Grail, and there's a big noise when he says,
Yeah.
"Yeah."
Yeah,
That
he was. Let me think about that for just a
was
second.
that his opening lecture because that was a really good
No,
lecture.
no, it wasn't. It was oh, what was he talking about in that one?
He was talking about theories of consciousness and how like it can't just be what it is or what its function is. They need to be united.
Yeah. I think that was one of like on Sunday, but maybe it was the same.
Yeah, he talked about the major theories like the global workspace theory
Yeah, was
and
it the 5 A's? Did he say like
yeah.
okay, that was the same one. Yeah, that was funny when the Holy Ghost, he's like, Jonathan will say something about this. Because that was also like such a cool part of it because it was in a church with this beautiful giant stained glass window and like old pews and um they played like church music at the end, like some Christian not it wasn't like Christian music, but it was Christians playing music and like a little
Organ with the church organ.
no organ, no, it was yeah, banjo or a couple guitars, um but yeah, no organ. And there was like a meal in the cellar that would like felt like you were at like kind of a you know how those meals like after church at 6 p.m. everyone shows up for. There was like kind of that. And it just brought like a cool it made it feel like less of an academic conference because I've been to plenty of those and you're just shuffling around to these tin chairs sitting and watching people go through the motions and stuff and it was a cool space to be in.
Yeah, I recently had a similar experience in Vancouver. I was invited to, this is the third time that we've had this Buddhist ethics. It's a conference, but we need a better word for it because we did have two keynote speakers, Garfield and Jin Park, both of them are friends. Buddha. It was all about Buddhist ethics. But we had to have that because we got big funding from some organization that wanted us to have some public facing events
Oh,
to
cool.
money they gave us
Yeah, yeah,
because they paid for us all to go out there, our
yeah.
hotel, food around the clock, everything. It was a
Perfect.
3.5 day thing, but it was only about 20 something of us. And apart
Uh-huh.
from those two keynotes, nobody read any papers or gave talks. Somebody would give like maybe a 5 minute intro into what the issue was that they wanted to be the moderator for. And then we would just have a group discussion.
Oh, nice.
We did that for 3.5 days. It was great. And one of the things that came up in the end when we were kind of doing our own post-mortem in the last round, what it was like, what we liked, what might be improved, where we're going to do it next time.
Uh-huh.
We try to do it every 2 years. Somebody used this Buddhist term, Kalyana Mitra. Do you know what that means?
No, yeah, please tell me.
It means like friends on the path. So we were asking ourselves, well, what is this thing? We've been doing it this is the third time. It would have been the fourth time, but the 2020 got canceled because of COVID. And it was at the University of British Columbia, beautiful place. I don't know if you.
Hmm.
Oh my
Yeah,
God,
yeah.
so nice. The weather was perfect. But yeah, we were like, because it's not really a conference where, like you said, everybody's shuffling from room to room and papers are being read and there's debating going on and all that. And it's
Uh-huh.
like the American Academy of Religions conference has like 10,000 people who come.
Right. Which is great if you're adding to your CV and getting good feedback on projects. I used to love like someone
Yeah,
comes up and talks to you and says like, "Oh, did you think of that?" Or
right.
they ask, or you're helping them. Yeah, that stuff's all very.
Totally purposeful,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
really better. It was more intimate and friendly. And then you eating with people 3 times a day.
yeah, yeah.
So by the time it's over, you pretty much got to talk personally with everybody in the group.
Yeah.
Lots of friends. It was
That's
a really
excellent. Yeah.
awesome. So yeah, friends on the path or Buddhist fellowship is another interpretation of that phrase. Like,
And
yeah,
was everyone an academic still, or how did that play out?
all academics.
Okay.
We're all kind of senior scholar slash practitioners.
Hmm.
So I think
That's
that
what I
was
love about Buddhists, like people in philosophy and religious departments. There's so many. I'm probably overgeneralizing, but there's so many non-religious people in religious studies departments. But the Buddhists tend to be practitioners. Like when I'll dig into like some Nagarjuna paper, you read and go, "Oh, I've been practicing this for 20 years," and that's why like you, I guess, really too.
one of my friends. Most of us are practitioners. I didn't actually, ask every single person there, but I know one of my friends who could only make it online this year. We did it hybrid.
Oh, cool.
Um, he's not a practitioner. He's just
Uh-huh.
of Buddhism. So
That's so interesting. I couldn't imagine reading about meditation and all that stuff for 15 or 20 years. I mean, it's like your whole life if you're a scholar. And then
trying,
being like, I don't really,
yeah,
no, maybe some other time I'll try it. It's like you're like a swimming pool scholar, and you're like, no, I never swim. Not even, why
yeah.
try?
Like what was her name? Was it Ruth Westheimer? That little woman with the sex? She was talk about sex on these TV shows. She was a sex expert.
Okay, but like I
Little
was abstinent or
lady
something.
named Ruth. Yeah, but like imagine if she never had sex.
Right. No, I don't want to learn from you. I want to learn from someone that's had a lot of sex, or at least like a reasonable amount, not like not,
Wow, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, you don't have to be like the most sexed person to do that, I guess. But um yeah, I mean Buddhism is intellectually rich that you actually don't need to practice, and it's still probably really rewarding because I
Yeah.
was you can actually talk about these multi-thousand-year-old ideas, and they're pretty intelligible from the beginning. Like that the Four Noble Truths, even if you look at them a lot of different perspectives, the eight-spoked wheel, like you're like, oh, this is kind of like human scientific discovery as well as rich contemplative, historical, cultural stuff. So I
Yeah.
could see, a scholar doing that.
Yeah, I think that you can go pretty far in terms of like insights and stuff like that by just doing the scholarship without actually practicing.
Yeah.
I think in the philosophy, it mostly says that you need to practice to get to the final, you know. But,
Are there any like sects of this is a little off topic, but like are there any sects of Buddhism that don't really have meditation somewhere in like the kind of core of it?
yeah, not to my knowledge. I mean, like, Nichiren, like the Sokogokai people, do you know about them?
No, not at all.
Yeah, they
That's
read
Japanese. Sounds Japanese.
Japanese, they read
Okay.
the Lotus Sutra and they chant. You might, once I tell you the mantra, maybe you'll recognize it.
Oh, I love the Lotus Sutra. Yeah.
Nam Myoho Rengekyo.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I forget exactly what it means, but it has something to do with prosperity. Um, and their whole
I can
philosophy
see that.
adding value, but they chant
Yeah,
this
yeah. That's meditative.
like drones. Yeah, that's meditative. So, um, and there is a philosophy of instant enlightenment in Buddhism,
Uh-huh.
but I think that the Eightfold Path is essential. The Four Noble Truths are essential to every form of Buddhism. So,
Yeah, yeah.
steps 7 and 8 are meditative or contemplative, whatever.
Right, that's true. Yeah, literally in the it's like
Yeah.
concentration, states of mind. Yeah, it's a meditation. Yeah, mindfulness. Yeah. So, yeah.
These brilliant scholars like Nagarjuna, um, I just assume that they're all practitioners.
I do too generally. Yeah.
I think it's generally known that most of those patriarchs in the history of Buddhism are some of them are more explicitly talking about practice.
Hmm.
Shantideva and Buddhaghosa and Asanga and all those guys. But Nagarjuna doesn't really talk about meditative practice. I don't remember him saying much about it, but
He's the like the fourfold, right? That's his the positive, the negative that unite, then that, and then like the negation of that or something. Isn't that his idea?
four-cornered negation,
Yeah.
Katuskoti or whatever, I forget what it's called. Yeah, that always confused me because my training for many years was in analytic philosophy and bivalent logic. So that I'm still confused by that. Even though I've taught it,
Yeah.
the best sense out of it, I have a suspicion about it. Like something doesn't ring true for me.
Well, it's like reading the Parmenides. We just read that in my reading group, and it's like,
Oh God.
okay, Parmenides, you had access to more words, but you keep saying nothing can't be a thing and all is, and if nothing is, then what? It's like, oh no, what? It's a really good like like simulated thinking. Like it's a great way to just like if the logical part doesn't weird you out, it's really fun to think about what that might mean, if that makes sense.
Yeah, also, if you think about koans,
Oh
um,
yeah, of course, yeah.
whether or not you count them as contemplative or meditative, I know John makes a big distinction between these two terms.
Well, they're useful too, right? Because like meditation is a state of mind, kind of technically, I think, right? Like I've experienced meditation, like that beyond words. Whenever a Buddhist says, I shouldn't even start by talking in this sermon, but I'm going to speak anyways, like they're trying to talk about non-propositional experience, like states of being. Um, and contemplation always has an object, even if it starts to like be like a self-perpetuating positive feedback loop. So a not like a lack of thought as a state of mind and contemplative relationship of like aspiring by proximity and by contemplation. So I think it is a very meaningful,
No, it's certainly a useful distinction.
yeah.
Um, Only by meeting John or listening to his talks has that distinction begun to become clear to me.
Uh-huh.
I think it's somewhat arbitrary, but that doesn't mean it has no purpose. So many things can't be defined in absolute terms. you
Well, I
know?
think it lets you talk about contemplation a lot better. I think that's one of the benefits because when you say like I'm, I'm meditating on love or something like that, or if you just replace that with the word contemplation, contemplation always has an object. That's why in Neoplatonism, right, the one is such a weird entity in their system because it's supposed to be beyond contemplation. Like you can contemplate beauty, and beauty is like the descent of the one into the intellectual world, into reality. But it's never the one itself. So it like you can contemplate things, but not like the cloud of unknowing, like it, that which can only be a negation or something. It's already getting very abstract. This.
No, no, this is very important because this is why I'm a little uncertain about these distinctions because, you know, this Neoplatonic opening to the one, is it meditation or is it contemplation? You know,
It's
and
I think it's contemplation that can lead to meditation. I think because negative theology to me can lead to like yogic at one ment, right? But these systems never interpenetrated in like written form in the ancient world very well. So we can't say like, oh yeah, the Neoplatonists talked to the yogis, and then this Greek word perfectly corresponds because it was used in a dialogue. They just like there's a lot of evidence that the cultures like talk to each other, but like Plotinus tried to go to India, never made it, and Alexander the Great went into India, and Nagarjuna is really near where Bactria is, right? Which is that Buddhist Greek city where they had like Buddha statues and Oracle of Delphi inscriptions. And but even that, there's not like, oh, these 10 essays that we found in Bactria of where all the yogis were talking to like the students of Plato. So
the one dialogue that comes close is the Nagasena and King Melinda. You know this
I've heard
one?
of this. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He was a Bactrian Greek king.
Yeah, and he has a Delphic Oracle wisdom writing on his tomb, which is like, oh, that's so
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, this is just an ongoing philosophical, analytic curiosity of mine about defining these two terms. Now that John has made it clear to me that there is, look, you could pick those two terms or any two, gobble and kook, whatever, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
All things. There are differences in this space, but so like um, it's an ongoing project for me. Philosophy of meditation. Like,
Right,
how,
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, this is literally your role in the world, Rick.
yeah,
Yeah.
and what's the difference between philosophy and meditation and contemplation? How are they alike? How are they unalike? I don't have the answers, but I have some things that are knots like that prevent me from getting an answer. So I know that they're rich, that if I keep playing with them, maybe something will fall out of the analysis. So one of them, I
That's the
think
philosophy, yeah.
I mentioned this a few times that I think once you probably heard it because you've heard, I think, all my talks with John,
Oh
where,
yeah.
and I might have even mentioned this with Layman, I don't remember, but what's the difference between philosophy and meditation, or how are they alike? And one of my Buddhist teachers, and the Goenka's student, Ruth Dennison, her Dharma name is Dhammadena, at a retreat at IMS, Insight Meditation Society, years ago, in like early 2000s, she just casually mentioned in her little Dharma talk, oh, mindfulness is just, she's very sweet. Oh, she was like,
Yeah. I love this impression.
yeah, mindfulness is just extraordinary attention to ordinary experience. And that clicked for me because, in a way, philosophy is that also.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, historically, philosophy might at times or for long periods, but it's not the whole of philosophy, as John makes clear and Hadot and others make clear. In the recent history of philosophy, it's mostly propositional,
Hmm.
but the whole history of it is not entirely propositional. I mean, Socrates played around with propositions, but that wasn't the whole of his shtick.
Right. He was trying to break you free. Like he was trying to be a koan for
Yeah.
these kind of like mostly aristocratic, hopefully like future philosopher kings, right? Or other sophists or but yeah, like he's using the fact that there's so much ambiguity and misuse, maybe mismindfulness of language, to hopefully snap out people. Oh, are you there? Oh, good. Yeah, it just froze for
Yeah.
like a minute.
I had difficulty with my Wi-Fi. I think it was on my side. Sorry about that.
No, no, totally.
On my Wi-Fi thing flickering. Um, so hopefully that won't happen again. But
No, I think yeah, a big part of philosophers, right, is to clarify terms. I think that's
yeah, so there's that. And but then I thought, being biased by analytic philosophy, I took that phrase and I added to it. So extraordinary. Oh, I changed one word from attention to examination because you can pay attention to something without being curious or analytic or discriminative in your
uh-huh.
attention, right? So when you add, discriminating where you want to be able to differentiate the parts of it and also notice how they integrate this kind of discriminative intellectual analysis. Philosophers doing that, they're not just paying attention, more attention. But then I thought, but that happens also in certain forms of Asian meditation. This
Oh
kind of
yeah.
discriminative prajna, paying attention to all the little aspects of things. So they're alike in that regard, but I like the word examination. This is just a friend of mine years ago. We bumped into the hallways with each other at Brooklyn College, and he asked me, "Can you come up with a definition of philosophy that applies to all philosophy?" And I spit that one out, and we started debating about it and going through with just what I was going through with you. And I'm not 100% sure, so I added a clause at the end: ordinary examination of ordinary experience and the concepts, language, beliefs, views, theories, perspectives, etc., arising in or from experience. But that's a mouthful. But that's
Right.
part of experience in the same way like human beings are part of nature. Our cities are not the natural world, but they are in some sense part of
Yeah.
us. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's just you could play around with words. It's good to try, but it's hard to really get a handle on it. But then the thing that John says that really throws me off is okay,
Yeah.
meditation is taking your lenses off and looking at them. And
Hmm.
contemplation is putting them back on and looking through them to see if you see better, right? This is one of his metaphors that he uses a lot,
Hmm.
right? But in a state of meditation, I'm not necessarily looking at my cognitive equipment. I've transcended it frequently.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? And
Right.
but meditative practices, which are drills or exercises like push ups at the gym,
Yeah, yeah.
things you do in order to get into more meditative states,
Hmm.
right? Those things involve looking at and playing around with, the equipment the way a mechanic will take an engine apart and put it back together and see is the carburetor working, this kind of thing.
Well, yeah, so that's what I meant by like contemplation can lead to the state of mind of meditation, like
And
the
so for
experience.
meditative practices,
Well,
though.
and yes, of course, yeah, like my one of my teachers, sometimes he'll say this is a method, sometimes he'll say, this is not a method. Don't think that what you're doing right now is a method, because you're not doing. The methods are a doing, and when I say do nothing, I don't mean do a thing called doing nothing. I mean this other thing over here, which is the meditative state, I would say.
Yeah, that's
And
kind of paradoxical, but I know
yes,
exactly
of
what it means.
course.
I know
Yes.
exactly what it means because I'm there a lot, and I'm encouraging my students when I guide them in meditations to get into this mode of slip down out of the mode of doing into the mode of being and all that. No matter which way you say it, you're encouraging a verb. Um,
Well, that's what John talked about in his meditation or in a commentary upon it right after in the Thunder Bay thing, is like, oh no, yeah, it was a Q&A. And so it's like, okay, you have this verbal presence and you're trying to get that to like calm and disappear. But then I think John might say also your procedural knowing, you want to get that to disappear, your perspectival knowing, you want to get that to disappear, and then maybe even your participatory knowing.
right. Because
And then
there's a duality to knowing.
right. So really, like, this unspeakable thing is a negation of these four cognitive like super functions. And John has even a couple times, once to answer a Q&A I asked him, um, said like, well, there's the four ways of knowing, and then there's this fifth thing that is not a way of knowing. Again, like these, these meditation teachers are like, this is not like those other four. It's the suchness and thusness of being, to be a little like Alan Wattsian.
Yeah, and yet at the same time, there is some kind of gnosis in
Well, that's a
that.
good way to talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a kind of intrinsic knowing that is being.
Right. And how could you not be conscious? Like if you start to identify some of those things with consciousness and say, well, you're removing them. What am I, dead? Am I asleep? Like, how could I not have
Yeah.
some?
But yet those descriptions like neither being nor non-being, or like it's samadhi without distinction, let's just say, or
Sure, yeah.
nirvikalpa samadhi. Um, you're you're still conscious.
Well, and like so the Greeks, I think, have this word chorus, in the Timaeus and in a couple of those other, like the Phlebas, I think too. This KH, I almost said C, like I'd be a horrible Latin reject if I started to use the word C to describe Greek words. But yeah, it's like KHOROS. Um, and it's like it's like the non-being of being, or that thing that you were talking about a minute ago, or Nishitani, right? Like a lot of his books were exactly like a philosopher that had done a bunch of meditation, trying to build an argument that would help people understand exactly what we're trying to talk about. And it's like, it's an ambitious thing.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. The language about states that are translinguistic is going to be problematic. That's the opening line in the Tao Te Ching.
right, yeah, like you're trying to reason your way to an understanding of something that really precedes reason, like in some way.
Yeah, no, I like the idea that it precedes it rather than transcends it. I mean, it does transcend it, but precede is better because transcend makes it sound like you have to attain something that's external to you, or
Mm,
some new place in your cognition or something. But precede is like, well, if Parmenides and others are right, you are being, and you've got some cognitive confusion, and then you clarify that, and the part of you that is preceding all the rest is the same place where you wind up when you wake up.
right, and it's like a constant that our cognition and our memory can trick us into thinking isn't there, or something like that, because once you have memory and a personality and a point of view, this idea of like a constant emptying of the universe that kind of spontaneously keeps itself going is like hard to grasp, right? Because it's like, no, I remember 2 minutes ago there was no cosmic world fire that disintegrated everything and then it reemerged or whatever. The Stoics have that kind of language, I think, trying to get at the same thing. Um,
Yeah, no, that imagery that you just gave about disintegration and reappearance, in Buddhist metaphysics, that's going on all the time.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Moment to moment, every little element of reality is both receding out of being somehow or another and being replaced by a replica or duplicate. But it's like every little particle of being is going through the teleporter
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and being disintegrated, and but then the pattern of it was like a blueprint is then repopulated with new energy, right? So it's like a kind of death and rebirth in every moment. And that's one of the issues about in Western philosophy of mind and personhood is like, would you actually be you if you went through the teleporter? Because it disintegrates you,
Yeah, yeah.
copies your blueprint, sends the blueprint to the other side, and then new energy is populated into the blueprint.
Right.
So you've been killed, basically,
Yeah, yeah.
and a doppelganger of you has been created that has your memories, but it's
There's a
not.
good chance that it's not you. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah. There's a good chance that it's not you. And like if you're a materialist, physicalist, and you think that's it, then you think, well, you've died, and it's just somebody else who's just like you. Your wife and others might not know that it's not you, but you no longer have consciousness if you're a physicalist and you went through the teleporter.
yeah, yeah.
You died, right? It doesn't matter how many more Robert Grays who are identical to you keep coming out of teleporters in the future. Each one of them, when it steps in, died, right? And a new one was created. And when you tell this to, like, this is the problem of personal identity, it's like, okay, what makes you you, right? If you're a physicalist, then you died, right? But the Buddhists say, they act like this is not a problem. Oh, that happens to us all the time. That's constantly happening, right?
Well, non-duality as a phrase, right, is such a trigger. It just didn't exist in the West the way it did in the East, and like, I don't know, yeah, because John has a really good talk with the scientist, and they talk about no self versus like no personality, and you're actually like the experience of no self to me is like almost like a flow state that pushes you to the very background of the background, but you're still conscious. Whereas if you start to like dissociate, that's like psychosis. And if you think, oh, every time I have a personal self experience, I should like stab it in the heart, you can get into these dissociative kind of
I
things.
know, I know.
And
It's problematic. I've written
yeah,
about this in some
yeah,
writings
have
that
you? Yeah,
I worry about encouraging people with this doctrine, the no self
mhm.
doctrine, because, if understood the wrong way, you'll have people committing psychic suicide in the process.
Right, right. It's very unhealthy, and especially if you're prone to that. And yeah, it's because you need a teacher. I think that one of the best things is to have a teacher. But if you're learning from a book or a bad teacher, you can start to think that there's like me remembering I ate at Taco Bell is like a sin of like the goal for no self. And it's
Yeah,
like, no, no,
yeah.
no, that's not um
Galen Strawson,
yeah,
John,
yeah.
John and I had a talk recently, a couple of weeks ago, but it hasn't been published yet.
Oh, cool, yeah.
We talked about Galen Strawson and the paradox of self transformation. We talked about the book, the handbook on the philosophy of meditation,
Yeah.
briefly, and then we switched over to the paradox. And he mentioned then, you might have heard this before, that Galen Strawson claims that he doesn't have a narrative sense of self.
I think that claim is existing in time and space, and he's proved wrong by that statement itself, right? Because that's like I think it's a really cool point that little kids and babies kind of don't have a narrative self. Like they have something like maybe a proto narrative self, but they're just all in the perceptual and the sensation. You tickle them and you move to tickle a kid, and they're like because they
Yeah.
have no filter.
They have the continuity of semi-integrated consciousness,
Hmm.
which is also simultaneously feeding into memory, but the memory has not formulated the narrative self yet. So you're right, it's kind of like pre-narrative
Yeah,
self,
yeah.
or what precedes the narrative. What's required for you to have a narrative self is a continuity of integrated memories, right?
Yeah, the narrative, like the self is pretty technical, right? Because there's episodic elements and semantic, and they're interacting in a way that if you ripped one out, the other doesn't make sense the same way anymore in either direction, right? You see this with brain damage patients, split brain and stuff. But I don't see how you can have like a human personality and the capacity to like self transcend without like a narrative self. I think John's more trying to put it in a perspective rather than like again like remove it completely. People misunderstand him, and I probably misunderstood him in that way.
Yeah,
Um,
this is a big problem in spiritual traditions, in my opinion. This teaching against the self.
mhm.
Because then, if you have a guru figure who's leading a spiritual community and everybody in there is trying to eradicate their self,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
guru is going to be the only thing that they trust and listen to. So they're outsourcing not only their moral compass, but their spiritual compass, their psychological compass, their existential compass, their philosophical compass. They outsource everything because they don't trust themselves.
That's
This is
that's why I love. Yeah.
not healthy. Um,
No, no, no.
That's not healthy at all. And John is not doing something in an unhealthy way. He's doing it the other way.
Well, that's what's unique about Plato and Socrates and philosophy is philosophy allows you to grow and challenge bad views and care about new cares, but without ever like it honors the self. The self is kind of like the playground in which those things can happen. And
Care of the soul,
well,
Socrates.
and yeah, and notice like in the I love it in the Platonic dialogues, it's always named people talking during these kind of aporia moments, these post or like above the discursive level of intellectual activity, but it's never like and I was gone and came back as a whereas if you look at some of these like deity yogas, they kind of do that where they're almost letting this spirit become their new personality, which you see all the time. Not
Yeah.
that I lived in 50,000 years ago, but I imagine that's kind of what it was like when they were saying like, oh, dancing and this kind of rapture, and then like Zeus would come in or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like the Oracle of Delphi was possessed by Apollo speaking through her.
Yeah, yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I think they were a little smarter than their audience too, because like they had books and they had people coming in that they knew were like gonna ask questions. So they had the capacity to say, all right, let's go back there, pretend we're reading this book, figure out a good thing to say to this person, and then go back to them and tell them it. So they don't have to really have a trance state. I mean, they had those gas pockets and stuff,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but I can imagine it happening just with a bunch of insightful people that go like, okay, we need to maintain the collective wisdom, and we're going to put a temple here, and we're going to encourage people to come every 6 weeks, and then we're going to ask them questions and then answer those questions with wise sayings. Um,
So the original televangelist healing performance. Uh,
well, you don't have to believe what you're saying, yeah, because we have like we socially coordinate through trust and imagination already. So then when you have someone that you elevate to like a speaking on behalf of a god and they tell you, oh, the answer to your question is love thy neighbor or trust thy government or whatever. The sayings are all very wise. Like I've translated almost every Delphic saying that I found, and they're all like just good sayings. None of them are like smack people more or You know,
They're all quotable quotes.
yeah, know thyself. Friendship is good. Avoid giving too many oaths. Like all of those things are, if you do them and listen to them, especially if you come as a dysfunctional person seeking guidance. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure in shamanism, don't you think shamans would lie to people all the time and go like, "Oh, you go that way, you'll be eaten by a giant," and they just really meant like, "Oh yeah, there's this cliff that I don't want you to fall off of or something."
When I went to earlier this year, I went to a free will conference in Lithuania.
Yeah, remember this?
I don't know if I talked about that with you before,
Not
but
much. No, no, no.
yeah, but yeah, I was invited. I was one of the keynotes. I was the final keynote speaker. Um, it was a lot of fun. It was multidisciplinary, so you had anthropologists there, and so it was like
Oh,
different
cool.
agency from all over the world.
Nice. Yeah.
So, but there was the guy who ran the conference, Audrius. I can't say his last name. In any event, him and a few of the other people there who are his students and colleagues or whatever, they did a study in India. Where he's been to India many times, Audrius, and he's a long-term meditator, and he teaches, I think, in a religion department or Asian religions or something like that. In any event, they went to India and they were studying, interviewing all these astrologers. All right. And now, like this, I don't know if you ever read about this one family of astrologers that only it's a legacy thing. You have to be born in the family. It goes back 7 generations at least.
Oh.
And like they have these things like the sayings from the Delphic Oracle, like
Mm.
these descriptions of people's lives. They have a whole bunch of them, like one for every day that someone's born on, like 365 of them, let's just say, right? Of the year. It's something like that. And
Okay.
it's on a papyrus, it's on like a leaf. It's written in Sanskrit hundreds of years ago on a leaf. And they go in and they talk to you. They come out with the thing and they read you your fortune, your future and all this kind of stuff. And that was just one of the interesting but this kind of, like the Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain, this
Yeah, yeah. Because again, like
stained glass
there's
windows in that church that you were in, all these props, they trigger our,
oh yeah.
spiritual emotions and everything. But, and what almost all these astrologers did was they would sell these different amulets and stones and metals, copper bangles, this, that. This is for this and that's for that. And people would go and say, oh, my daughter, I think she's possessed. And, and they would give her remedies and all this, read her chart. And like there was one guy there, one of the astrologers, who he said, oh, I lie to my customers all the time.
Well, that's right, because the imaginal and imagination are like that's the conduit. I mean, like people have visions of a stained glass window and then they build it and they kind of technically made the world more spiritual and more holy and more beautiful.
Yeah,
Now, is there a being like sending those like radio waves from like beyond where we can physically see? Um, I don't know technically, and I don't think so as a pragmatic like the way you watch me operate in the world. But that's because I listen to Henry Corbin and read his books, and like I take Plato's definition of things are real if it's a very simple definition. If you can affect them and or they can affect things. That's
this,
it.
this is the criterion out of most Buddhist philosophy. I've written about it. The causal ontological criterion, I call it.
Yeah.
So if something can be impacted or can impact anything, if it can
Yeah.
have an effect on or be affected by anything, then it's real.
Right. And it's such a perfect criteria because if it can't do those, why would you care? If I'm in a simulation and I can't detect it,
Very
this is
good.
my life. You
Yeah.
know?
Oh, what's his name? David Chalmers. Are you familiar with
A
him?
little
The heart
bit, yeah.
He's the guy who coined the hard problem.
Yeah, I've read that paper, like the 96 or 86 or whatever it is.
Some of his papers were a little difficult back then.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Great guy. I spent a couple of weeks with him at a Buddhism thing back in 2012.
Oh, does he meditate or did he meditate?
No, maybe he does now because
Okay.
yeah, it was NEH, National Endowment for the Humanities, a 2 week summer institute thing that Evan Thompson and Christian Kosaru and Mark Sitteritz put together at the University of Charleston or Charleston College, whatever, in South Carolina. We were there for 2 weeks, so it's like a grant. They pay for everything, and it was called Investigating Consciousness, Buddhist and Contemporary Views. And we had Buddhist scholar practitioners, analytic philosophers like David Chalmers, and phenomenologists like Dan Sahavi and whatnot. It was a really nice group of people coming and talking every day. And then it was about 25 of us sitting around, and we would do 2 weeks of eating and drinking and
Yeah.
arguing. And he was there, and I remember him asking about meditation, like as if he never did it before. Is there
Okay.
a way to do it? He was asking for a reference, so he might be doing it now. I have to ask him. He recently came out with a book called Reality Plus.
Okay. It's interesting from someone like him.
It's about augmented, virtual, and simulated realities and whether or not what you just said, like should it matter or
Yeah.
all this guy. It's a really good book. I read. He asked me to review it and contribute some ideas to it, which I did.
Oh, cool.
I haven't read the printed version, but I'm sure he thanked me in there somewhere.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, he makes a pretty good case that, like, pretty much like what you just said, but so much more nuanced, so many different
Yeah.
about how it really wouldn't matter if we were virtual beings, you know?
Yeah. If you can't tell something,
Yeah.
then what does
It's
that even mean? Yeah. It's almost like the.
an argument. I forget who he was having this debate with. I don't know if it was Bernardo Kastrup, somebody, yeah, about this kind of thing. Or maybe it was that Lex Friedman. Did you ever see him on the?
Oh yeah, I love Lex Friedman. Yeah, I've
John
known
was
him
on
for.
there. I think it might have
Oh,
been
it's so good.
that Lex was giving him a hard time. I think it was with Lex that he made this argument where two possibilities. Either if we're in a simulated world, uh, we can never find out about it, or we can. Now, there are no alternatives to those
I
two.
think that's exhaustive. Yeah.
Never find out about it because that's how well it's designed, the nature of it, it's a closed system, or we can find out about it. So if we can never find out about it, that certainly doesn't matter. Nothing should change. There should be no implication for how anything should change because that's related to the causal ontological criterion, I would say. I'm adding that. It can't impact anything, this fact, right? So it bears no cognitive relationship to anything else, right? But the other one is if we could. Well, if we could, then science is the best way to go. We should just continue with science because that's our greatest epistemological promise of finding out. And by science, he means it in the broader sense.
Hmm.
John's version of science, which is cognitive science and everything else, right? So either way, we should continue with science, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
not be skeptics. Oh, well, maybe we're in, so forget everything, It's a pragmatic argument.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, if you can detect that a loved one is doing something bad to you, you should want to detect that, right? But if you just cannot, if you're married or dating someone that is so much smarter than you and so good at hiding things that you just could never figure it out, it's like energetically better, it's like metabolistically better to just not care about it, to drop it like.
That's a good example. That calls to mind when John asks his students,
Yeah, definitely.
how would you like to know? How many of you are in good committed relationships? Hands up. And out of those who raise your hands, how many of you would like to know if your partner was cheating on you? All the hands go up. And he jokingly says, these are all the relativists. And then I asked that, they don't believe anything is true. And then I asked them why. And they say, because it's not true. It's not real. So apparently they are closet, non-relativists.
Well, and the counter to that is there are actually, if there is a true deception happening, there would be some things impacting you
Yeah.
that would be worth you caring about it.
Yeah, a former professor friend of mine who was my dissertation advisor originally, Jonathan Adler, he wrote a book called Beliefs Own Ethics. I mean, like how ought we to believe? It's a kind of epistemology. And I remember him making this argument in a lecture that I sat in on. I think I was auditing a class of his at the Graduate Center, where he made this argument like, okay, he rejected these simulation theories. Like, I forget what version of it was. Oh, it was like Harry Frankfurt's got this thought experiment. I don't know if we've ever talked about it, where he says, that's right, it wasn't simulation, it was this. Suppose there's a whole bunch of these thought experiments, and there's so many of them that they're called Frankfurt cases, right? Named after
Nice.
Frankfurt, the guy who wrote On Bullshit.
Oh, I love him. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, he was one of my two external examiners on my dissertation.
Oh, I definitely did not ever heard this before. That's so awesome.
Him and Galen Strawson were my external examiners,
Oh my gosh.
outside judges.
That's like having The Rock and like Taylor Swift as your committee. Like, how do you get that's so amazing.
And most of my dissertation was structured around a critique of Frankfurt's theory, but one which improved on it. At this critiqued it, what its weaknesses were, and then added these things that were improvements on it. And he liked it.
Nice, yeah. I could see him doing that.
I
Yeah.
was like, we got Frankfurt here. He's going to rip me apart for critique. But he defended me against some of the other people on the committee who were trying to, knock down that's what they try to do. They want to see if they can knock you down. It's like a martial arts tournament.
Right, and you're gonna have to do that the rest of your career. So like getting some practice.
Your oral defense. But in any event, the classic counterexample that I think Harry Frankfurt became more famous among philosophers than the bullshit thing.
Mm-hmm.
This one where he says, suppose a mad neuroscientist, call him Dr. Black, plants a chip in your brain unbeknownst to you, and he can remotely monitor your mental states and your intentions. And when you go into the voting booth, if he wants you to vote Democratic, you will. Because if you go in intending not to vote Democratic, a little alarm will go off on his screen. He'll see that you're about to go in the direction he doesn't want you to go in, and he'll press a button which will initiate sequences in neurological firings in your brain, which will get you to think differently, and then you'll vote for the Democrat, right? So now, it's just a thought experiment, but it serves a really interesting point where
No, this is interesting, yeah.
Frankfurt argues, he says, you'll see where this is going in a moment. He says, you have no alternative but to vote for the Democrat, right? However, so this is important with determinism, because determinism says you never have alternatives. If determinism is true, every instance of the universe is
Right, you were destined to have the thoughts you had, like, and without control.
neural firing in the history of the universe was deterministic, like billiard balls. A hit B, B hit C.
Yeah, exactly right. External causes only all the way down.
There's never an alternative. There's only one history of the universe.
Uh-huh.
Big Bang and the laws of nature. Everything else is dominoes, right? And it's unalterable, right? So that's the argument against free will from determinism says that's how determinism is. Laws and initial conditions predetermine everything. So there's never an alternative. So you think that you chose freely, but you couldn't have done otherwise. And if you couldn't have done otherwise than what you did, then you didn't really choose freely, right? So Frankfurt's thought experiment is, well, wait a second. Let's call this guy who's got the chip in his brain Jones. and he calls him Jones. He said, Jones couldn't have done otherwise because Dr. Black was standing by ready to make sure that Jones voted for the Democrat.
Yeah.
He said, but suppose that Jones, of his own accord, voluntarily, freely likes the Democrat and votes for him. Dr. Black's alarm doesn't go off. He doesn't press the button. He doesn't intervene at all. However, if Jones had wanted to vote otherwise, he couldn't have because Dr. Black would have prevented him from doing so, right? So he makes this argument. He's saying, therefore, the inability to do otherwise does not necessarily rob you of your free will. If you do what you want to do, if you act in accordance with your own beliefs and values and desires,
Right.
even though
you chose, you didn't realize you couldn't have chosen the other one, but you were through your own inner cognitive processes.
You've done it of your own accord.
Yeah.
You're morally responsible for it. Now, if you tried not to do it and Dr. Black pressed the button, no one would know, but Black would be responsible for that vote, not you. No one would know that. But metaphysically, Black would have been the author of that choice, not you, right? So Adler, my friend, Jonathan Adler, he passed away some years ago from leukemia, I believe, but brilliant guy in that book, Beliefs. I think he wrote about it in the book, but I heard him lecture about it once. He said, you know what? As a philosopher, I have to, take thought experiments on their own terms. But this one, he thought, I reject the premise that if something started happening like that in my own brain, I'm conscious and reflective.
Right.
I question myself.
I think that is a trouble.
Yeah,
You can become aware of the chip. Yeah.
Yeah, like something is wrong. I suddenly like Donald Trump, kind of thing. I have Trump derangement syndrome. I don't like Trump. What the hell's going on in my brain? I got to go have my brain examined. So he made a better version of the argument than that. But that if you are at least a healthy, self-reflective being, that scenario is not as credible as Frankfurt and others try to make it sound like, oh, you could just.
Well, a lot of thought experiments sound really good when you only give them to like undergrads and don't really like. That's I think that's the problem with some of the popular people like in the wisdom space is they're super popular, but they just debate like 20-year-olds. It's like, of course you sound incredibly intelligent if you're a 35-year-old lawyer who professionally debates 20-year-olds. Like, that's just the whole problem. And yeah, and logic is really tricky, right? Because you can paint these like semantically seemingly perfect situations that just don't map onto reality. Like they're just like a good counterfactual and a good thought experiment makes you go, oh, like with John when he talks about L.A. Paul and Agnes Callard and how you can't inference your way to knowing what it'd be like to do certain things. Like I just can't infer. And there's even a little bit of flaws with that because I kind of can infer if I have enough data and I'm a sincere thinker what it would kind of be like to be a parent. Maybe not perfectly, but I can still kind of connect the dots. Yeah. But it's a good point because it's like if you think your inferential view of the world is actually like perfect and what would happen in every case even without experiencing it, then like those arguments that Paul and Callard make are like, oh, I'm actually a weak thinker in some situations. I actually do need to live in the snow for 3 months to really know what it would be like to live in the snow for 3 months. And as a Floridian, saying it's really hard or would be really easy should have very little merit to anybody, including myself, because I've just never lived, had I never lived in the snow. So yeah, inference is tricky because it's really abduction, right? I mean, like you can infer from what are they, well-defined problems maybe, but most of the things you care about that aren't automatic anyways are not in like perfectly inferable.
Yeah, and those of us like the 35-year-old lawyers, I'll make the analogy with philosophers in my tradition, these analytic philosophers.
Perfect analogy, yeah.
Argue with their 18-year-old students, What if you were a brain in a vat? All this kind of stuff. But in all fairness to thought experiments as a methodology,
Oh, I love them. Yeah.
even though like the hypothesis, the assumption that you have to grant in order for it to work might be wildly implausible.
Hmm.
If you can use your imagination to think, well, what if that was the case? Then what would follow? Well, it's useful. Even if the assumption is wildly implausible, these things are what Dan Dennett calls intuition pumps.
Yeah, and it's a lost skill because Aristotle talked about all the time. I've been reading a little more. He's like a bad guy in the Neoplatonic where I'm like, he's trash. Get away from Aristotle. But now I'm kind of like I got enough base that I'm starting to get into him a little bit. And he would do that. And it's kind of like the whole idea of a belief, of the capacity to have beliefs, is to take positions you would never take. So, okay, what if I did have no money and I was in the Ukraine and I needed to get out? Yeah, I don't want that. I don't want that. I don't want to believe that could be true or possible. But the capacity to imagine things, like you said, that's the perfect word. And to imagine what it's like to be, I want to say something that wouldn't trigger people, like a Canadian or chased by a dinosaur or something. Like, even though I don't have the experiences to hold that, or really like a good diplomat, right, should be able to do that. They should be able to say, okay, here's what the French team believes, and I'm going to hold that in my mind, in my cognition, my imagination for hours, trying to gain access to a perspective that I don't implicitly have. And then that way we can, either I can get my way better or we can negotiate better. But I don't have to ever believe what they believe. I'm not ever going like, oh, France is the best, and I forget I'm an American diplomat because I took on the belief that France is good or something like that. Like, we've just so lost respect for the other or something like that we refuse to even entertain a belief that I wouldn't have. But Aristotle was awesome about that stuff.
Yeah, I think I don't. The quote is sort of warped, but based on Aristotle. You know this one, something like, "The ability to entertain a thought without believing it is the mark of an educated mind."
That's his quote. Yeah, exactly. I heard that very recently when I was reading
Yeah,
about
he
him.
doesn't word it that way, but that's the idea. So
No,
that's
but he says exactly that. He says, like, if you bring up a point that's too outside the scope of the argument, you're just not an educated mind. Like, and he's saying, like, okay, educated minds can argue and have one position, or maybe they kind of tend towards a couple, but they can scope 8 positions. And yeah, if you're just unable to do that, are you even considered like a worthy thinker? He would say no, based on that quote. Um,
yeah, and I think that in our current political climate,
right.
I mentioned Trump, derangement syndrome, and then liking Trump. As just an example that'll immediately conjure up what I'm referring to when I say our political climate. I think people on both sides of that who are at the extremes are actually afraid to even entertain the thoughts of the people on the other side. They like, unlike your ideal diplomat, they don't want to make comprehensible or rational. They don't want to see as understandable or as plausible the views on the other side, because I don't think it's conscious. I think it's kind of pre-conscious or in the background, a kind of phobic thing that I don't want to understand that, you know?
Well, there's
Like,
a little bit of truth to that, right? You don't want to go around like investigating child homicides if you're a sensitive soul, right? Because just by contacting the thoughts of people that would do that, and that reality would, like, if you didn't grow from it and grow into a bigger person, it could really be horrible. And they have that kind of infantile mentality. I think Aristotle's right to call them weak thinkers. If you can't uh see another person's position without totally emotionally reacting,
right.
how do you have so much power? Like, it's amazing. That's almost why Trump won, is because he could get people to like unconsciously react to him and then like win debates that he should never have won, because they're focused over here, and he, like, the audience is focused over here, and he unraveled them, and they go, oh, now I'm just it play. The whole Republican Party didn't know how to like treat him, and he rose to kind of the front runner because no one could figure out how to debate him correctly. They try to do the old thing, and that he'd blow that up and charm the crowd. They try to be like him, but they're like first graders trying to play basketball with 12th graders. They don't have a lifetime of experience doing what he was so natural to do. And yeah, and just the fact that he haunts the minds of people today shows that there's this very unconscious um way of dealing with him. His persona is like 1,000 feet tall to these people. They can't take him as an ordinary being. It's so weird. Yeah, it's you know, yeah, rational plus, right? We're not just these behavioral economics. Oh, I saw the empirical evidence. I have perfect self-knowledge and I acted, right? We have all this egregores haunting us. Yeah.
Yeah, so tell me what you think about egregores. I've heard you mention this a few times. I've heard the term floating around in the liminal web.
Yeah. Can we take a 2 minute break? What time do you have to go?
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Okay, cool. Yeah, let's just take a short break and I'll be right back. All right. Yeah, so egregores.
Yeah.
I
I
think it's really cool. Yeah, go ahead.
I have only a vague idea of what that term means. Could you educate me on that, Robert?
Well, yeah, so it's interesting, right? So I studied team science with directly the second most cited multi-level team science theorist and under multiple students of the most cited team science theorist. And so I look at like we have all this terminology in applied psychology. So there's individuals, and then there's teams, and then there's organizations. They micro, meso, macro, and they have concepts like synergy. So first of all, a team versus a group. A group doesn't have a shared goal, and a team does.
Right, like
And same thing,
a group of people at a bus stop.
right? Yeah, or a mob, exactly. Like a mob's a little different. They might have a shared goal, but yeah, the bus stop is not like, all right, how can we best be the best bus stop team?
Or the group of people at your gate at the airport.
Right. Yeah, there's just and yeah, like my condo or your neighborhood, right? That unless it's like a really weird neighborhood, you guys aren't going like, all right, what are we gonna do? What do you value? Okay, we both like this. Let's build a pool now.
Unless they have a homeowners association.
Yeah, loose, like barely can use the word
Condo
team.
board or something, yeah. A
But yeah,
con-
so the levels matter because there's things that a team of four can do that four individuals that aren't coordinating cannot do.
well, that's like that's those studies John talks about where, you give a problem to individuals, MIT students to solve and they get
Yeah, exactly. Collective intelligence.
right. Four of them to work together, they get it 80% right.
Right, and they're a team because they're coordinating and they're sharing like, hey, you guys want to do this? I want to do this. Oh, you don't care? I don't care. Like,
Distributed cognition, yeah.
right. They have um yeah, so we have all this language and organizations are really weird, right? Because a leader, the founder, can put a program that says, "Hey, you get $1,000 if we hire one of your friends," or "Hey, everyone here, we love to promote internally." So it can start to have these properties that actually can outlive the people that make the properties. So, like the founder of McDonald's is dead, but McDonald's is a huge force in the world, right? It's a multi-billion-dollar entity that influences the planet and society. And so none of that was actually in the mind of the founder necessarily. So they have these weird properties that they can create incentive loops, and also like they have resources. So any person that goes, oh, I need resources, I want to have a life or a family. Oh, IBM. I'm going to figure out who they hire, become like that, and get them to select me. And so they kind of take on the life of their own in these very weird ways that we just take for granted. So organizational psychology has this a lot of these ideas, like leaders. Um, Organizations attract people that fit their CEO roles without even trying almost. Just like, oh, every CEO keeps having these properties.
These egregores function as attractors.
Right. So egregores, right? So I think because people are so bad at predicting their emotions, we're able to create powerful technologies and psychotechnologies that go beyond the scope of our idea, have these second order effects. So I can like this is maybe a gruesome example, but the guy that invented like nitrogen fertilizer, which allowed the global population to like quadruple over 50 years, and from the O's to the 50s, the 1950s, this one guy created this agricultural thing. And also the Nazis learned about it and killed all the Jews with the same Zyklon Z, like one chemical difference. So this guy wants to make farming better, and it also helped eliminate, millions of Jews, right? So the second order effect was not predictable. Or like the car, right? So the car created the suburb, and maybe the suburb created the meaning crisis. So Henry Ford, in wanting in all of our desires to travel, oh, I can see Rick more often. Rick can see a 79-year-old mother-in-law more often. Like that wasn't a design feature, but it, like all these desires made the car rise up and become central attention. And then the car allowed all these things to happen that could have never happened, like the World War I, right? The car broke down. A horse didn't break down. A horse would have kept riding by that bar where they shot the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, but the car broke down and allowed this new opportunity to exist. So we're able to create things like corporations and organizations and technologies that are way beyond their intended use and our capacity to see the consequences. So I think egregores are something like that, where Facebook, right? Imagine being like a lonely nerd that thinks they can get girls if they invent a cool new thing. And now you hear like no one approves of Facebook. I never see anyone praise Facebook. But like that was really cool for the first 6 months. Like MySpace, I remember people being like, this is awesome. You got to get on this thing. And then who knew it would create this like parasitic information manipulation economy that everyone hates now, right? But we're addicted to it. We've abandoned our old social norms, so we're like trapped in it. So egregores have these kind of, I like the you have to be really careful, right, with the angel and demon language, because you can really get paranoid or get supernatural. Whereas if you say McDonald's is like a demon versus saying, oh no, it's a company of 8,000 people, blah blah blah. Like you can be very dry about it and avoid, I think, things. But there's something about mythologizing it that does let you interact with the ideas of it better. So when you say something like Twitter is an egregore that causes a lot of social pain, how do we kill this demon, right? How do we slay this dragon? To me, all of what I just said is kind of how I think about it. There's this mythical, but it's all happening in the real world. There's no second world where, like, again, like an archdemon is like, ha ha ha, 500 years have passed, and I will send to Facebook to confuse the mortals or whatever. you know.
Very good. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Because I've seen this terminology used with the mythic language by people who I think do have a two worlds ontology,
Mhm.
and who really do think that this 500-year demon thing is going on. So there are people who think that psychically that these egregores are like, what's the word? Zeitgeist spirits,
Well, and the way it was cool, the way me and Layman framed it is, and I learned this in just watching all the videos and reading books and stuff, is it kind of is a bad egregore steals agency or lowers agency, and a good egregore increases the agency for the group, right? So a bureaucracy that might have formed to do something good 100 years later or 500 years later is now full of rules and attracts schmucks. And just like the people under that bureaucracy are actually worse off because of the way it's functioning. Or the opposite, right? Like you could call the hospital system an egregore under these kind of definitions, and it's saving lives. Like it's a that's where the angel part of it. So, and again, like I think if you just keep it in like, okay, is my relationship to social media robbing my agency? Or video games is another really good one, right? They have the flow state. John talks about how they're just like implicit flow state machines. So if I'm like 19 and all I want to do is play whatever the newest game is, I think I'm getting what my desire wants, but I'm losing agency. And that's like the interaction between agency and our kind of like, Plato would say the kind of the two lower horses, the thumos and the eros, gone bad, or not eros, the appetitive, I forget the Greek word, but so our appetites and our social desires, when they're hijacked and we lose agency, that's when you start to say like, oh, that's a bad egregore. It's actually like
yeah.
eating the mind of those, and it's like people are giving us resources and attention and identity.
Based on our original agreement about what makes a thing real, egregores are real because they have causal
That's
powers.
right, and organizations are too, right? Like, and so are second order effects that we fail to predict when we create things. So um,
So even though there's no entity that is a conscious individual, even structured like the corporation as an entity and an individual and an agent, it's not conscious, right? Like you and I are
it
conscious.
is embodied, right? Because it does live in people, but yeah,
Yeah, but right, but it's as if it is a conscious agent
right,
because it does have a kind of narrative history and all the norms and preferences and
right.
mechanisms that guarantee that it continues and everything. So yeah, very interesting psychology, I suppose.
Well, yeah, and especially if you take Timothy Morton's hyperobject idea and say, okay, things that, like you said, can have these properties of impacting us, can kind of be like the where does a grain of rice become like a bowl of rice? You keep adding a grain, and all of a sudden it's a bowl of rice or hay or whatever you want to use. So where does the shift come between five pieces of hay, which are not a bale of hay, and some X number of hay that all of a sudden it's definitely a bale of hay? So these things kind of can, oh, this video game, oh, Minecraft, right? Minecraft, the guy was just some nerd and he made a game that like one person could design, and he put it out in the world, and a billion people just loved it. It was like the next Legos, where like Legos when I was a kid was like, oh my gosh, Legos are so amazing. And that was that generation's Legos. So it totally took on a life of its own beyond the vision of the guy. He sold it to Microsoft and had like a pile of money that he lived under or whatever, like slept on. And so it's like that's what's so funny about like, okay, it was started by a person who had a lot of agency, and then because of the way our desires and our capacity to not predict things well interact with things like thoughts and objects that we create. Um, Again, you could call like the Buddha an egregore because he took on a 2,000-year life beyond his physical desires or whatever.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Jesus also.
Right, exactly. Well, that's where it's interesting too, because persona, right? Audience capture, the idea that if you and I had 10,000 YouTube subscribers, and now I'm Rob the YouTuber, and I tell my mom to like make my favorite food and get out of my way. Like I get an ego and get captured by this fake thing. Um, so the idea that like technology perverts salience signals and then you get captured by your own like stuff. I don't know, I'm a lacking word, but your own the thing you're outputting, your persona becomes your ego.
Yeah. One of the papers that we read for that Buddhist ethics conference was about Swami Muktananda. I don't know if you knew who he was. He was called the Hollywood Guru for a while. I think he had followers like John Denver and Shirley MacLaine and a bunch of whatever. The it's called Siddha Yoga, Siddha,
Okay.
Siddha, which is like a perfection.
Uh-huh.
Siddhi is a psychic power. A Siddha is a perfected being.
Okay.
He's the student of another kind of fairly well-known Indian saint named Swami Nityananda. In any event, I know him. I met him
Oh,
because
cool.
first teacher, Hilda,
Uh-huh.
had Hilda, Joya, and Ramdas, the trinity that I started out with. Hilda and Swami Muktananda were students of the same Swami Nityananda.
Okay. Yeah.
So he's like a spiritual uncle of mine, so to speak,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
teacher's spiritual sibling. And big following. His predecessor, his name is, I think it's Guru Ma. You might have heard of her. Pretty big following. In fact, you know that book, Eat, Pray, Love.
Yeah.
That's the organization that she was
Oh,
in.
wow.
The Siddha Yoga folks, and Guru Ma was Muktananda's predecessor. In any event,
Yeah.
written by somebody who was a former member of the cult. It's kind of an ex-cult expose about all the people who Swami Muktananda did, what is it called? Tantra yoga with.
Right. Yeah, I want to be that guru.
Abusing